Okay, are we all ready to rock and roll? I'm on tiptoes. Obviously designed for a tall person. Okay, good afternoon, everybody. My name's Jill Baker. I'm Director of Development at Lloyds Bank Foundation for England and Wales. So a big welcome to everybody in the room and everybody who is online. And we're delighted to host you all here. Ooh, just a reminder about phones, I'll come back to that. That's all right, love, you crack on. For the lessons we've learned from our 2018-2022 strategy reaching further. So just before we start, could everybody in the room just turn to the cameras and wave at all the lovely people online? Hello, lovely people online. And now I feel like we have bonded. Okay, so it's always dangerous giving me a mic because I want to do that Victoria Wood. Have you seen me, friend? But I'll stick to the plan. So there is no fire alarm planned. So if the fire alarms do go off, get out. There's a fire exit here. Oh, it's like being on a plane. Or you can go out the doors and down the stairs if you need assistance to leave. If there's a fire, there's a yellow box by the lifts. If you wait there, fire marshals will come and see you to safety. I've been told there's no smoking of anything and no vaping on the premises. Also, if you haven't already, I'm going to say something now, and I don't really know what I'm talking about. If you haven't already engaged with our online platform, please sign in. You'll be able to ask questions and make comments in the chat. And finally, thank you for the reminder, nice person over there. Could you put your phone on silent? This is being live streamed, and anyway, nobody wants to be that person, do they? So, to kick off, I'd like to introduce Anne Lim. Anne is our relatively new chair, notable because she was the first ever woman chair of the Scouts Association, so a big shout out for the girls there. And she holds a range and has held a range of chair and non-exec positions, but now she's our chair. We're very, very happy. So I'd like to hand over to Anne to introduce the day. Thank you very much. We just have to do a bit of...
Well, Jill, thank you. And I feel I ought to begin in that Victoria Wood vein by saying, have we seen her? Kimberly? Anyway, I mean, that just reflects our age, Jill. She may not be Victoria Wood and Kimberly so well known to those of you in the room or online. But anyway, huge thank you to you all for being here today, whether you're physically present or taking part in this through technology. It's just great to have you here, and I'm hugely delighted not just to be here and to be the chair of the Lloyds Bank Foundation, but to share in the activities with you this afternoon. So I hope you can hear me, and I'll keep my introduction brief so that we can get into the real detail, which is what you want to kick about. Lloyds Bank Foundation, of course, is an independent charitable foundation. We exist because we are funded through the Lloyds Banking Group, and all credit to them for having set up a foundation that wants to do good stuff, wants to help Britain prosper is their bank's mission, in effect. And they are certainly, as a bank, becoming much more focused on their purpose and being a purpose-driven organisation, which is not unhelpful. So we as the foundation independently, though, work in partnership with you, small local charities and the people in the communities that you serve in order to try and help you change lives and to work collectively towards a more just and compassionate society. You'll know from our little strapline that we focus on 3 activities. Of course, we fund. We give you unrestricted funding, which can be helpful. We develop, that is, we try and give you support and resource to develop your organisations. And of course, we try and influence policy and good practice, both speaking about policies that work and using the evidence of the practice that you see in your communities and in your charities. So by working in this way, I hope we help you in your work, and I hope we are helping not just the charities that you lead and work in, but actually those communities that you are serving, helping you to grow stronger, and also helping, I'll say a little bit about this now, giving assistance to some of the issues that are really quite complicated now, that are really I imagine the day-to-day bread and butter that you have to deal with the people you serve, and the kind of barriers that they're coming across, which are not just single barriers, but are multiple and complex. And that makes the work you do even more important, and the work we fund and develop, I hope, even more impactful. So why did I take this role on? Actually, basically because I suppose, having chaired the Scouts, I kind of knew what it was very much like to be, through the people I met in Scouting, a volunteer doing work that really mattered and made a difference, in that case with young people, but actually, as it were, out there in the community. And although I can do a certain amount of that as an individual, I do know that charities need strong governance, and it just so happens over the years now I've developed a skill set, which means I'm pretty good at chairing a board. I understand the accountabilities of board trusteeship and charity trusteeship, and I try, I think, through my experience, to help people who are chief executives like Paul Streets here, and senior executives like Jill and the whole team, to not get in the way of their job, but actually support them in their job. So I was very happy to take on a kind of backseat role, but an important role as a charity trustee, but particularly because of the mission of the foundation and what we do, as I've just described. I thought in these opening remarks I'd just take us back to remind you, although I say this somewhat, what's the word, bashfully really, just to remind you of the challenges that you have been facing day to day over the last 3 years. This is the nation as a whole, of course, across society as a whole, and in the communities you serve, and the charities you lead and run. But anyway, the way I remind myself of these is I call them the C's, the 6 C's. But that's, I don't have a monopoly on that in terms of the way they seem to me to bring together some fairly major things that you have to face. But the first, of course, was that change in government. Well, actually, not a change in political government, but the government in December 2019, because, of course, that was all about preparing for the exit from the European Union. Sorry, I'm little, and if I move away from the mic, I notice occasionally my voice dips, but I hope you're still hearing me. But anyway, we have a Conservative government. We've had a Conservative government in place for some time, and they had that mission in 2019 of getting Brexit done. But of course, we know, and certainly those of you who work in the environment that is supporting and receiving refugees, and actually just earlier on, last week, I visited one of the centres that we fund in Moss Side, Manchester, the Manchester Refugee Support Network. Just one small example of the, if I can say it without being controversial, I think the increasingly hostile environment that is faced by people seeking asylum here or fleeing to this country. I'm also critically aware of the way in which charities are perhaps often portrayed in the media, or even by some public figures. I don't mean to say that most people would do your work down. You know, that definitely kind of wouldn't be, well, it would be a bit in for a dig, wouldn't it? It wouldn't be really what they do. But I think charities are not immune from certain criticisms that perhaps command more media attention than they should, when the media should be focusing on the good work you do. So I'm just aware of all of that in terms of the macro political climate. Then, of course, the second thing is we've had COVID. We've had well, I imagine most of you have had it, I've had it, but I mean, we've had a complete global, unprecedented global pandemic to deal with, and you had to respond very rapidly to that. My third C, this is just convenient for the sake of the alliteration, is to use the word colour, but actually by that I mean, of course, the Black Lives Movement and the appalling murder of George Floyd, just to choose one example, but the way in which that has shone quite rightly a light on the entrenched racism and the inequalities that still exist woefully in our society, and indeed in the charitable sector. And we in the foundation take that very much to heart in the work we're doing and in the way in which we're trying to work with you on that. And as if that wasn't enough, we now have a conflict, my fourth C. You know, we have war in Europe, about which I won't say anymore. And then just when we thought we might be getting to the end of things, of course, we have a cost of living crisis. And the decisions taken late last night or communicated early this morning about the reversal of the tax advantages that the Conservative government were going to give to the high paid, I don't think in any way really take away from the cost of living crisis that you know and experience on the ground, and you personally, I'm sure, will be affected by, because the vast majority of people are. And all that, of course, I haven't even mentioned climate emergency, so I could have had another climate crisis, but I hope that is now, in a sense, something that is very much ingrained in all of our thinking. So it's not a good or easy time to be working, and I just wanted you to know that we're aware of that. I want our staff at the foundation, we don't have a huge staff, I think about 40, but the conditions that I know are described as volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. That dealing with the combination of all of that is tough, and it presents challenges. And I can't promise that the years ahead won't be challenging, because I think there will be for all of us, but I hope we can help with that. I've already mentioned the pressures on the public spending, if you like, or the financial crisis as a result of the wider macroeconomic situation, and that is not going to get eased quickly at all. And of course, we know that it impacts the most on those most disadvantaged in society and the charities that serve them. So we've a new Prime Minister in post for whatever it is, three weeks. I don't know whether there'll be any change there, but I wouldn't like to predict that. But my guess would be probably we won't have it is just an educated guess. We probably won't have a general election for a year or two, and therefore the conditions you're working under now are probably certainly not going to stabilise. They might even get worse. And if we can help you face those and support you, well, we shall try and do that. So it's very challenging, but are there opportunities? And I'll be concluding with this. Well, we think there are opportunities, and we hope that today you will go away feeling that there's some hope and that we can help you, because our primary task, as I've said, is absolutely to support you and the people and communities that you work with. So what we're going to do today is share some of the things that we have learned over the last 3 years, things that we've got wrong and how we're trying to fix that, things that we've had to change and how we're adapting to those changes. And because, of course, we don't have a monopoly on the answers, we're really still learning from all of that ourselves. We very much want you to help us learn and improve things together, because we're still in that stage of sharing reflections and wanting to learn from your challenges and your discussions. And that's why we've asked you to join us here today and to share those reflections and thoughts and ideas with us. So please, whether you're online or in the room, don't shy away from that. You have a complete invitation from me to be as challenging with us as you, and with me, as you can be, because obviously we are launching a new strategy for the next 5 years, and a huge amount of work has gone into that. And we hope that by taking that longer view with you, we will give you, as I say, some hope, some encouragement in the way we want to move forward as responsible funders, and how we want to develop the partnership we have with you, and the way in which we work together, I hope in a mature and in a productive relationship. So we hope the report will give you encouragement, as I say, and to start us off in the detail of this, because you'll have noticed I'm only a chair, so I don't really do the detail. I mean, I have read the documents and I do know what we're doing, but the real experts here are now coming to put their voice into the room. And so as I step down, I just want to introduce you to Richard Painter, who is Head of Grants in the Southeast, yes, it is, and Caroline Gentile, who is Policy and National Programme Manager at the Foundation, and they're going to cover the session which is called Learning from Our Practice. So Richard and Caroline, over to you. Thank you all.
Bear with me one moment. So I've got a working clicker. Thank you. Okay, well, that's sorted. Thank you. And thank you, Anne. As Anne mentioned, Caroline and I are going to talk through the key lessons the Foundation has taken from delivering the current strategy. Anne's already talked through this, so I'm not going to go through it in detail, but there are 3 pillars that underpin our strategy that we set out in Reaching Further, and they are that we fund, we deliver, and we influence. As Anne also mentioned, the country and the wider world are a very different place now from when we launched our last strategy, and the sector, and we as a funder within it, have had to learn and adapt to these changes. This has involved us learning from our own mistakes, changing how we do things, and making some tough decisions along the way about where our own priorities should lie. So the learning report has been drawn from a number of different places. Firstly, from our own monitoring with charities. We've amassed a large number of monitoring reports, over 2,000 monitoring reports and learning conversations over the last few years. Our evaluations, both internal and external, including our anonymous biannual survey of all applicants, which is carried out on our behalf by NFP Synergy. And for some programmes, including our work in the 6 communities, we work directly with a dedicated learning partner. We've also commissioned or contributed to a number of research projects. So these are the 8 lessons. I'm going to talk through the first 4 of these, and Caroline is then going to talk through the second batch of 4. And we've also got sessions a bit later on covering number 4 around equity, number 5 around collaboration, and number 6 around relationships a little bit later on. So we'll dive into those in a bit more detail. So I'll start with the first of these, listen actively. Over the course of the last strategy, we moved away from the idea of funding outcomes for service users and focused instead on funding charities in the knowledge that they in turn deliver real social value. The monitoring we collect as a result of that has changed, focusing on the qualitative experience of partners on the front line. This was a useful starting point for us, understanding the emerging issues facing our funded partners at the outset of the pandemic. But we needed a much more rapid approach than that if we were to keep pace with their changing needs. We started collecting the insights from conversations with regional managers, the conversations they were having in their area, and combine them with the feedback from others like development consultants and charity peer networks to create a live understanding of how charities were adapting to the unprecedented issues that they were facing. We also commissioned independent research like the value of small in a big crisis, which echoed our own experience that small charities had showed up and stuck around during the crisis. This grounding gave us the confidence to act to fundamentally change our offer, providing additional short-term funding and reshaping our funding priorities for the medium term to focus on supporting frontline charities working with the people hardest hit by COVID. This change in approach was appreciated by charities in 2021. 75% of funded charities felt that the foundation understood their organisation, which was up from 57% when we started collecting the data. This quicker, more varied and conversational approach to monitoring is something that we're keen to take forward and build on in the coming years. Fund flexibly. We've always provided core funding for charities, but the volatility of the pandemic gave us the final nudge that we needed to make our funding fully unrestricted. This means that charities can spend the money how they choose. Many spend it on immediate things for now, like rent, salaries and bills. Others have the freedom to put it in their reserves for a rainy day if they choose to. Charities were, of course, as we all were, in a state of flux during the pandemic. As part of the renewed offer, we provided them with a dedicated development partner, like Fiona, wherever Fiona is, who you'll be hearing from shortly. And they directly supported and coached charity leaders and linked to the wider capacity building support that those charities needed. This might be short-term support, for example, helping charities to adapt their buildings to meet social distancing requirements, or longer-term funding like financial planning and business planning. We also accessed more skilled resource from the bank and piloted an organisational resilience programme. From all this, we learned the crucial importance of flexibility. Unrestricted funding provided a strong basis of trust and an opportunity for charities to ask the fundamental questions about their services that COVID had thrown at them, and to engage with our non-financial development support, which can be tailored to their specific needs. Lesson 3, lighter touch doesn't mean less robust. At the outset of the strategy, we set out to simplify our processes to make sure that we are not wasting charity time. Charities, when they're applying to us, complete a short initial expression of interest, and then any further information that we require is collected through conversations. As well as being less bureaucratic, both for charities and for us, it allowed us to reduce the time from application to decision significantly, from what was a maximum of 6 months to what is now a maximum of 4 months, with many decisions made much quicker than that. This hasn't been without its trade-offs, though, which Caroline will touch on shortly. So we've made real progress there, but we do still have a long way to go to make sure that the process is as simple and as inclusive as it could be. We need to be proactive and not passive when it comes to identifying and meeting the needs of charities who are not applying to us at the moment, but could be and should be. We also consciously changed our appetite for risk during the previous strategy. This involved a shift in mindset, moving the conversation with staff and trustees from questions like, is this a safe investment, towards, can we support this charity to address these challenges? This has meant that we're now funding charities that we wouldn't have previously due to concerns that we might have had about financial stability, strategic planning or governance. Interestingly though, and thankfully, despite this change in mindset, we continue to see a very low rate of closure at the charities that we support. And finally from me, equity requires action. In 2019, we set out our standalone strategy around equality, diversity and inclusion, covering both ourselves as an organisation and the work that we support. As Anne's already mentioned, the consequences of the pandemic and the Black Lives Matter movement accelerated this work for us and our choice to focus initially on racial equity. Our first step was to review who we were funding at the time. We found that our criteria and processes were disadvantaging and underfunding organisations that were led by and for Black, Asian and minority ethnic communities. We needed to act to address that, and we ring-fenced a minimum of 25% of our budget for charities led by and for these communities and introduced a specific funding strand for racial equity. At the same time, we have improved our data collection so that we have a better understanding of the leadership of applicant organisations and the communities that they serve. We're going to build on this and improve it further in our future funding. By taking these steps, we've significantly increased the number of Black, Asian and minority ethnic-led charities we support and now have equivalents in the proportion of white and non-white-led charities that are successful at application to us. We're also retaining the minimum 25% budget going forward. We do still have a long way to go though, and we acknowledge that. We know, for example, that our development support has worked less well for Black, Asian and minority ethnic-led charities, particularly smaller ones. We've gaps in the skills and experience of our support partners. We started to address those gaps, but we need to do more going forward to make sure that the offer works as it should do for all of our partner charities. So a key learning for us around equity has, over the last couple of years, is to act quickly and act publicly, not letting the fear of getting it wrong stand in the way, as this leads inevitably to hesitation and delay. We continue with this mindset and commitment to inclusion, both within the foundation and as part of our external work through the new strategy. I'm going to hand over to Caroline now.
So the fifth lesson is all about relationships. Much has been written and discussed about increased partnership working during the pandemic. We witnessed it both through the charities that we fund, as well as increasing our own collaborative working. Our collaboration cut across our funding, development and influencing work, from working with charity infrastructure organisations as part of the Never More Needed campaign to try and secure more funding from government, to working with other funders around pooled funds and assessments. Key to these collaborations was a clear understanding of how they fitted against our own strategic objectives, understanding how they helped us achieve our overarching aims and making sure we didn't end up on a mission drift, and also being clear about what we could bring to the table, whether that was our knowledge, perspective, networks or money, to help ensure we collaborated in the most effective way. Clarity around this, alongside being vocal about our openness to collaboration, helped us find the right partners, and for the right partners to find us too, so we could focus on who are the right organisations to come together to achieve a common aim. The sixth lesson is focused on relationships. We've been striving to be a relationship funder for a number of years. Building relationships is the foundation stone of our people and communities work in 6 places, for example. But the pandemic brought a new focus to the importance of trusting and honest relationships. For us, unrestricted funding is the commitment that allows for high levels of trust to build alongside good faith conversations. Richard's already touched on how we embed these into our approach, and it's been key to enabling the foundation to understand what charities really need. During the pandemic, it highlighted the strain that staff and leaders were facing and led to an increased focus on wellbeing support through our organisational development work. When we talk about the importance of relationships, it's not just about the relationship between us as a funder and the charities that we support. It's also how we can help charities to build more relationships with their peers, which has helped to build networks to support wellbeing, as well as sharing practice more broadly. We really can't underestimate the importance of investing in building these strong relationships. The 7th lesson is about acknowledging your trade-offs. So while we're in a privileged position as a funder, our resources are finite. Our income is impacted by what happens in the market, and subsequently we were impacted by the pandemic, which means we often have to make tough decisions about where and how our support can make the most impact. Our response during the pandemic was to fund more charities, but for shorter periods of time. We wanted to make sure we weren't reducing the number of charities we supported through the crisis, which would have been inevitable if we funded each charity for longer. We also wanted more charities to be able to access our organisational development support, with the hope we could strengthen them. The focus was on helping as many charities as we could through the crisis. But this meant we couldn't provide the long-term funding that we know that charities need. Ultimately, we chose breadth over depth of support. With far more applications than we could feasibly fund, we also aimed to say no more quickly, trying to reduce the amount of time that charities would spend on applications that would ultimately be unsuccessful. But in doing so, the quality of our feedback suffered. We know that our grant making will never be perfect, but we need to make sure we have clear rationale for the decisions that we make and challenge each other in making those decisions so that we can fully test them before they're finalised. And we need to be fully cognizant of the impact of the choices that we make. The final lesson is all about bringing together assets in combination to build something greater than the sum of its parts. For us, that's the combination of funding, development and influencing that gives us our strength. For example, our influencing work is grounded in what we hear from the charities we support. We capture this data and use it to build a case for change alongside our charity partners, whether that is with government or helping to shape how Lloyds Banking Group better supports people who might face additional barriers when accessing banking services. In the case of the pandemic, that data, alongside work with a lot of other organisations, helped to secure additional funding from government, which we could then redistribute to the charities that we support through the Community Match Fund. We couldn't do this without the relationship with hundreds of charities that are consistently providing intel to us and sharing intel. So taking the time to explore how our different assets can feed into and support each other is important. It's this breadth across the foundation that helps us to bring different approaches to different challenges, increasing the range of tools at our disposal. When we look back, as Richard mentioned, a lot has changed since we launched the last strategy, and no doubt will continue to change as we navigate the current crisis. So we'll need to keep listening to charities and trying to understand what changes in the external context mean for people, communities, charities and society. We hope the lessons from the last crisis will stand us in good stead for responding as life continues to get harder. In sharing these 8 lessons with you, we know it might not be possible or pertinent for everyone to apply them in their own organisations, nor do we believe that we have all the answers. We will, of course, still have difficult trade-off decisions to make, and we will still get things wrong. But we want to continue to listen to what charities are telling us and continue to adapt. We know that we're always going to have more to learn. We want to use the principles outlined in the report to help guide our practice, and would encourage others to think about how the core principles might relate to your own organisations. We hope that they're useful to others too, so that we can all better serve the charities that we support. And if you want to find more information about the reports and read them in more detail, they're all on our website.
And I'd like to invite up onto the stage Varsha Palmer and Fiona Murray. Come and join us. So Varsha is the Executive Officer at Equality Action, where she's led the organisation through many changes, but she's also very active in her local community in Loughborough, where she, amongst other things, helped launch the first multi-faith pantomime at Whittington. and she also runs arts events and is involved in the Mela. I hope I've got that right. And Fiona has more than 22 years experience in the public, private sectors, civil society, NGOs. My goodness, just need the BBC added on there. As a management consultant, supporting really small organisations and really massive ones as well around their equitable practice. And they are going to talk to us about how relationships unlock progress. Okay. You got it? Yeah, it needs to. Yeah, that's it.
Thank you very much, Anne. Whew, just had to take a breath because I'm a little bit nervous. Thank you for having me. So, relationships sit at the heart of the Foundation's work as a funder. For Lloyds Bank Foundation, this statement couldn't be more true. And I have seen a relationship-based approach strengthen charities beyond that of any standalone grant. I wish I had known charities and funders like Lloyds Bank Foundation when I was running a charity, and also when I was working for a funder. I developed and witnessed so many relationships form during my time on the Development Partners Programme. The relationship between myself and 16 charities, being able to form bonds with trustees, CEOs and operational staff. The relationship between regional managers, seeing each with different unique skills, strengths and approaches, coming together to share and learn. And when they came together with us as a group of development partners, we came together en masse and it was always energising and really insightful. The relationship between myself and my regional manager in the Northwest, Ella, she nurtured me, inspired me, connected me to other commissioned consultants, built my knowledge, and most importantly, she always took a learning approach to our relationship. She always provided a safe space for me to share and problem solve together. If regional managers like Ella had more capacity, I believe they could absolutely do the development partner role. That's not, of course, to do consultants out of work, and some funders might actually appreciate having the additional capacity and independence that a development partner can bring. The relationship between myself and other development partners was also really fabulous for being able to share tools, share knowledge, share learning and ideas. And I'm still in touch with many today and we continue to share. I'm exploring more ways to make consulting tools more open source and more accessible, and to enable more low bono or low cost consulting services. I'd also love to see the consulting sector build the skills of new and emerging consultants coming in to diversify the pool. When I think about what worked well, I think about the honesty between development partners and Lloyds Bank Foundation. We had a safe space to challenge. So an example of this is when we first started, some of us observed that we didn't feel that the pool of consultants was very representative in terms of diversity. We said it quite bluntly, and this was actually taken and received in very good faith. Lloyds Bank Foundation continued to invest in their approach to accessibility and inclusion, not just with working alongside fabulous consultants like Bonnie and Ngozo, but also by listening to us. So when we made requests for things to be made more accessible, they would deliver. And an example of that was making an easy read version of the organisational mapping tool, which we used to help, a self-assessment tool for charities to help with their assessment of where their strengths were. Charity leaders fed back that having someone there for them as a CEO who was culturally aware, energetic, collaborative and knowledgeable really helped them through difficult times, personally, professionally and emotionally. Having regular one-to-ones with Ella, for me, was really helpful. She's incredibly knowledgeable and very collaborative, so I always felt that I had somewhere to go for problem solving. Charity CEOs also valued their time together. They were able to reflect and share and learn. As development partners, we hosted learning sessions, and we could deliver a range of different activities led by what charities wanted to know about. So one example was EDI tips and tools, and I was able to explain the purpose of accessibility budgeting, and how to complete equity, diversity and inclusion and impact assessments to support charities to think about accessibility and inclusion at the outset of project design before submitting funding bids. I also received the help of another commission consultant, Jonathan, who shared lots of tips and tools for internal and external communications. When I reflect on what I would have done differently, there is so much. I think I would have explored a more programmatic approach alongside the personalised approach. So by this, I mean I would have liked to have delivered more training and tips and tools on things like agile project management, financial analysis and planning. I think some charities would have appreciated this approach. Hosting joint working earlier on between the domestic abuse charities, I think also would have paid dividends. I had 6 domestic abuse charities in my portfolio. I often had to strike the balance between chasing people up and recognising their need for space. So work could sometimes arrive in a flurry. It's a bit like waiting for a bus. So when I first started the programme, I made sure that my client deck was nice and clear and I was ready to do all these assessments and I was ready to get going. And the work didn't come. That's COVID. And then at other times, at peak times, I felt like there was so much demand and I was having to juggle a lot and I felt that I was missing actions and I'd have to be reminded. I was also conscious that I didn't always want to remind charity leaders for things and I had to try and balance, do I harass them yet or do I give them the space because it's COVID and they're all fighting fires? Some charities during this programme just didn't have the capacity to engage in some, or in one case, pretty much all of the programme until the end. Although this was really disappointing, it was just real life. The charity leaders that are fighting fires, as I've mentioned, and yeah, personally, physically, emotionally, they had so much going on. Doing this work, whilst also having the privilege of working alongside national funders and commissioners, gave me a chance, like I always do, to champion working in a more authentic and genuine way with lived experience-led charities, and especially small charities. I could detail the problematic nature of signposting into small charities. I could push for national charities to think about sharing power from the outset when designing partnership projects. And I could push for fair compensation to small charities for their skills and time. I could encourage all organisations to make themselves think about their place in the market. I was proud to have been able to manage or support the development of some local and national partnerships, and I still continue to do so. Without doubt, the charities really valued unrestricted funding more than anything. It gave them the capacity to engage in the programme, and they would have survived without me, I believe, I'm sure. Of course, at times I was helpful for navigating crises or providing technical knowledge and help. But the combination of unrestricted funding gave them the space to engage. So if I had one key takeaway for you as a peer audience, I would just say, please give this approach a go. Whether you do this on yourself or whether you do it in collaboration, just give it a go. And I think Jonathan or Caroline mentioned before about nothing has to be perfect. We all have to start somewhere. And I personally dream of a day when this kind of programme is made available for international development charities. So if there are any international development funders in this room, please take note. I think if we really want to genuinely push share power to the Global South, we need to think about making unrestricted funding available to charities in the Global South, and we need to support and fund consultants from and within the Global South. I'd also promote a mix of personalised mentoring alongside the programmatic training or programmatic support that I mentioned. Unrestricted funding and consultancy support led on the terms of the charities is what I believe made this programme so invaluable. So I was absolutely honoured to be involved, and I really want to give a huge shout out to Ella, who is absolutely incredible, and also Peter and Michelle. But thank you. The charity, the funder, just continues to learn. We can't ask for more. And now I'm going to hand over to Barsha.
Thank you for having me. We are here as your partners, not funders. That was a line that I heard from our regional manager when we were successful this time with Lloyds funding. And I think that was like music to our ears. It's not often charities are told things like that. My name's Varsha Palmer, and I work for a small charity called Equality Action in the Midlands. It's in Loughborough. If you don't know where Loughborough is, think of Loughborough University. The charity was set up 50 years ago, well, more than 50 years ago, and we have had our ups and downs, struggles with losing funding, thinking, will we survive or not? The work we do, and it's been highlighted in the previous talks, at the moment, the inequalities are so much out there, the pandemic and all the other things that add to it. And I'm pleased to say, Lloyds, amongst other funders, have actually seen us through some of the toughest times we've had. Currently, we're funded by 7 funders. We are a strategic partner for our local council, but we also get funding from like the Big Lottery, the Rank Foundation, to name a few. I'd say about 80–90% of our funding comes from funders. And the not the annoying, but the thing that really gets me is that most of the funders expect a project, KPIs, sort of what are you going to give us for this money? And for us, I think the important thing is that you need to look after yourself if you're going to be able to look after others. And I think organizations, small charities particularly, forget to look at the internal structures, the governance, do we have the capacity? Are we looking at our financial planning, future direction? You just kind of keep delivering because you think that's what the funders want. So for us, when we got this funding from Lloyds, it was like a godsend. Our relationship with funders, I think it's very important that you develop that relationship. There's got to be honesty, transparency. If something's not working, you need to be able to put your hand up and say, look, we've tried this. We kind of live in a very uncertain world at the moment, and things change. Something that you think is what's needed, next day isn't. So I think as long as you have that relationship with your funders where you can pick up the phone and say, look, we've got this money, this is not happening, can we change it to something else that fits the criteria? So I think developing that relationship, whether it's formally through your reports, end of project reports and things, or informal coffee chats, and shout out to Gary there, who always says, I'm here, if you need a coffee and a chat, please pick up the phone. So I think being able to talk to your funders and having that relationship is vital. Our funding with Lloyds, the application, and with other funders, it's challenging. It's not easy to develop that kind of relationship. You have to invest time, energy, and quite often people forget that small charities are kind of trying to do everything for everybody. In my position, I feel like I'm kind of stuck doing operational, but then expected to do the strategic, and we don't have the money to do that. So this funding has come at a really crucial time for us. I just feel as an organization, it's letting us kind of take a breath, look at what is it that we need help with. So things like the consultancy that comes with the unrestricted funding is brilliant. We need to look at our safeguarding. That was one of the conditional offers, thank you. But things like the governance, our capacity, our staffing levels, can we manage the projects? We do some fantastic work in our locality, but it is hard work keeping on top of it. So I think having the unrestricted funding is a huge shout out for Lloyds. The consultancy, and then for me personally, being able to sign up to the Akivo membership, get a mentor, being able to say to Gary, oh, help, this is not happening. It's a hard place to be in where you're stuck between a board of trustees and a team of staff. So I actually feel like for once, somebody's actually listening to what I need and also to what the organization needs to make it as strong as possible to meet the challenging times that we live in. I think a recommendation to all funders out there is, I appreciate, you need kind of impact, KPIs and stuff, but also just take a thought about the small charities that are really struggling to try and kind of fit the criteria of looking after the beneficiaries, but also the expectations of the funders. I've probably not gone on as long as I should, but that's me done.
I'm just sorting out my didgeridoo. Right, that's it.
Thank you.
Both wonderful, got us right back on time. even better. Very grateful. Now, remember back at the beginning I said I was going to say a load of words and I didn't know what I was talking about? Well, apparently the bit I missed was if you want to submit a question, you have to scan the QR code on the standy-uppy thingy.
I think that's great. I'm happy to take a question before coffee. However, for the online people, we need the technology to work so they can ask questions as well. But you've given me a great get out of jail card. So why don't you ask your question and then we'll stop and have some tea and coffee. And when we come back, hopefully all these questions will suddenly flood in and we'll be overwhelmed and we'll all be here till midnight. So do have a moment, madam. Mm-hmm.
It's been touched on by Richard this morning. Oh, it's in my face.
Okay, thank you.
But I would love to hear a little bit more about some of the thinking behind the scenes that Lloyds is doing as such a far-thinking funder about how you balance up that tension.
Okay, so who wants that one then, Paul? No pressure, mate.
There's no simple answer to that, is there? I mean, we are only responding to what we're hearing. So in a sense, I think the only thing a funder can do is be really close to those it funds. And I guess the issue for all funders is, in the end, if I arrive, I'm a walking checkbook. People are going to treat me like that. And I'm not going to hear honesty. So I think funders have to really, really work hard to get honest feedback. And you won't get that by walking in the room and asking people. You'll get it by anonymous surveys, third parties, evaluations. You've got to get honest feedback if you're going to improve. Because people will always tell you you're wonderful if you're a funder. It's what this life is about, which is really weird. How can you improve if everybody tells you you're wonderful and you know for sure you're not? So the deep thinking we've done is because people have really challenged us. Richard talked about actually our development partners challenging you on the diversity of the range of people we're using to provide development support. So we try to respond to that. So in the end, I guess it's down to relationships, isn't it? Can you have a relationship? It's all true of our own personal relationships too, isn't it? We need people who relate to us, who will be honest about what we're good at, but also not what we're bad at. And I guess that is a really difficult thing for funders. And in the end, there's a huge gratitude bias amongst those that are funded by us, who inevitably will say thank you very much for the money. But actually, what you really want to know is what are we doing well? What can we do better? I think the challenge that you sort of touch on is that facing particularly leaders, and Richard also talked about this, and so did Caroline. One of the things I think we did quite a lot during COVID and have learned a lot is to provide, if you like, mental health support around leaders. We did some work with a range of third-party providers who provide support just for people under acute stress. And we think that if we fast forward, the problem was we were coming out of COVID and we thought that we were going to be all breathing a sigh of relief and going to some kind of normality. And then Ukraine happened with the cost of living crisis. And we are deeply worried about leaders who have gone through and carried enormous stress during COVID and now having to carry that forward in the next 2-3 years, sometimes with quite weak boards. And what it does is really expose weak boards, because good leaders are going to need really strong, effective boards to be able to sort them. But particularly think of the pastoral side of what it means to be a leader of a small organisation where demand is going through the roof. And actually you want to respond to that, but actually you're going to have to ration. I was talking to the platform in Surrey a couple of days ago saying actually most charities are going to have to ration what they do over the next few years because we will not be able to meet all our needs. And that would be very difficult for voluntary sector leaders whose first instinct is, I must provide something to everybody who comes through the door.
Thank you.
Thank you for stepping in, because I had no idea what to say. Okay, you'll be glad to know the technology is now working. All the questions are coming in. So just to reassure people, we're not going to get through them all. I'm going to do a bit of a mop-up of questions towards the end. But if your question isn't answered today, it will be answered online after the event when we upload the materials. So don't feel like you haven't been heard. You will get an answer eventually. Okay? So we're going to stop for a little break and come back about 22, but I'd like to thank Anne, Richard, Caroline, Varsha and Fiona for their time, and I'm sure you'll all join me in thanking them. So thank you everybody for coming back so promptly. Somebody's whistling. I feel like being rounded up like I'm being rounded up like a sheep. Oh well, if the cap fits and all that. Okay. So we've semi-resolved our question issue. If you're in the room, you can't ask a question ever again. No, you can, but we're going to have to do it in the old-fashioned way. So don't worry. If you're trying to get on the thingy, don't bother. We'll pick up a question. Okay. Now, I'm hoping, miraculously, our next two speakers are going to appear on the screen. Is that right? Oh, that was not good, was it? Hello, lovely ladies. Okay, so this next session is about Equity Requires Action. And I'd like to introduce Ngozi Lynn-Cole on the left. Some of you may know her. Ngozi is a force of nature in the northeast, which is where I live, which is how I know. She was Director of England for the National Lottery Fund for several years. She's Vice Chair of a large acute NHS Foundation Trust. She's Chair of North East Justice Together and, from personal experience, an excellent provider of caffeine and coaching. And she's seen me through many a moment. And with her on the right of the screen is Bonnie Chu, who is the Managing Director of the Social Investment Consultancy. She not only does that, but she also set up a very successful social enterprise called Lensational, which works with marginalised young women in 23 countries around the world, using photography and storytelling to enable them to tell their stories. And just, I think last week, has revealed that her personal story is in the latest edition of the Goodnight Stories for Rebel Girls as one of 100 young change makers. And that is out tomorrow. So I am not on a commission, but I strongly urge you to go and buy it. So lovely to see you both. I will hand over to you to take us through Equity Requires Action. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Jill. And we're very pleased to be here virtually with you all. We had the great opportunity to work with Lloyds Bank Foundation, I think almost 2 years ago, when we started off on this journey. So what we're going to do in the next 20 minutes is to have a bit of a conversation. Of course, equity is one of the 8 lessons learned at Lloyds Bank Foundation's report, and we'll break that down into 6 lessons learned from our side. So I'll start with the first lesson learned. The first lesson learned is think big, but start small. We started quite small. So in July 2020, Lloyds Bank Foundation started out with a very precise problem, which is based on their research, they found that the success rates for applications from Black and minoritized-led organizations was much lower than mainstream organizations. So they started out just to get support from consultants on how to address this. And you will see that 2 years on, as the learning report already stated, they have been able to increase 4-fold in the share of grants going to charities led by and for Black, Asian and minority ethnic communities. So it was a very precise problem with a very precise solution, which is creating a specific funding strand, ring-fencing 25% of funding to Black and minoritized-led organizations, which led to the proportion of grants growing 4-fold. And when Ngozi and I started working with the foundation, we were examining actually what were the processes and what were the criteria that were leaving these groups less successful than others, than other charities. And some of the factors that we have identified that was also very fortunately at the back of a lot of research that has been done in 2020, looking at the specific challenges that Black and minoritized-led organizations face. One of the challenges was, for example, the turnover of organizations, that due to many years of underinvestment, Black and minoritized-led organizations tend to be smaller in terms of their turnover. Governance and some of the financial processes, just the back-end infrastructure that you will also expect, again, due to years and decades of underinvestment, they are just not at the same level as mainstream organizations. So while we were uncovering what are the factors leading to their relatively less successful applications, we were then able to work with the team, and especially Harriet at that time, we've done a lot of work to just tweak the application processes so that we would be able to give a level playing field for these organizations. And we think it's really important that we start small because Gozi and I also work with many other funders. Often funders can feel very overwhelmed about the scale of the issue and they don't know where to start. And I think we were very lucky that we were able to start small and address, well, it's still a very big challenge, but relatively small. But that we were always mindful of the wider vision. There was always this very, very strong focus that racial equity is the first step for Lloyds Bank Foundation's EDI journey, but it can't just stop there. And as you will see also from the learning report, there were also many other aspects of EDI that Lloyds Bank Foundation has been able to touch upon and now incorporate even more fully within their funding organizations. So that's my first lesson learned. And yeah, Gozi, what do you think about that lesson?
Absolutely, absolutely love it. For me, it's kind of this idea of a golden thread across everything. So it couldn't just be about a 25% ambition. I don't know if Jill Morgan is in the room, but she corrected me about this. It was about at least 25%. But for me, it's very much about what else. So you can give out the money. That's the easy bit. I used to be a funder, so I should know this. But actually, how does everything else feed in? What does the outreach look like? What's going on in assessment? What's going on in decision making? How about monitoring after the money has changed hands? How about development support? All of those feed in. So equity does require action, lesson number 4, but requires really thoughtful, decisive, but swift action with regular reviews. So that brings me to our second learning point, which is about looking at both sides of the coin, the internal and the external. And both the internal and external progress need to go hand in hand for it to work. This ensures that the foundation can be authentic about the ambition, what it's trying to do, but really using learning across the piece to ensure, give yourselves a really good chance of success. So a couple of points to make. One is staff will be looking at what the foundation is saying, but also what it's doing. Good governance was essential. So how's the board cited on this? To what degree was the board supportive? They were hugely. What changes needed to be made at board level and potentially senior management team level? But I think the most important stakeholders were very much the grant holders and the communities that the foundation set out to support. As lesson number 1 shows, it was about listening actively, making sure that we're checking in with the views of the grant holders and potential applicants as we go along, using their views to shape decisions that are relevant, but also standing ready to course correct as we go along. Final point I want to make on external progress was also sharing learning by Lloyds Bank Foundation, which it did really well, but also learning from others. So we did a lot of work, for example, around participatory grant making, looking at learning from the likes of Paul Hamlin Foundation, also Rosa and the National Lottery Community Fund, and using all of those to explore where the foundation could go next. So it's about just making sure that both internal and external progress were going hand in hand to ensure through true authenticity and overall success. Over to you, Bonnie.
Yes. And the third kind of lesson is this move from equality to equity. So when we were first recruited, Lloyds Bank Foundation at the time was using the term equality, diversity, and inclusion. And I know we don't want to have a debate today about the terminologies, because often that could be a bit of a rabbit hole. But when we were first having conversations to that point, Gauzy, around the internal conversations that were needed on this topic, we introduced the concepts of equality versus equity versus justice. And equality is using an approach where we assume everyone is on the same page, that everyone needs the same thing, whereas equity is understanding the structural barriers in society that we recognize not everyone is on the same page. And there was this photograph we use so much, which is you'll see three pictures, people trying to watch a football game. With equality, some people can't watch the football game because you give everyone the same kind of support. So the step was just too low for some people. Whereas equity, you give different people different height of steps. I'm not very good at explaining the pictures, but I hope you kind of can visualize it in your mind. Which led to some people being able to see the football game. But ultimately, justice is about breaking the barriers, that you will remove the wall that is between the people trying to watch the football game and the football game itself. But I think we had this quite a big move, I would say, from equality to equity, where I hope the staff can say for themselves, but it seems that people really understood and saw that we can't have the same process for everyone, because there are years and decades of injustices and inequalities that have been built into the funding system and in our society at large. So we've recognized that there's a need for positive action in funding. And I think the learning report mentioned that as well. And it's also recognizing that the enhanced program, for example, the support for some of these groups would need to be different. And there was a question in the chat earlier, how has the development support been different, or for organizations that are led by Black and minoritized communities. And one of the things we recognized during our work with Lloyds Bank Foundation was that the enhanced consultants actually lack representation in the beginning, that a lot of the consultants may not have the direct experience or lived experience of the issues that the new grantees, particularly from the racial equity strand, are trying to tackle. So we supported with a new recruitment round. Gauzy and I also supported directly some of these charities. And it's simply recognizing that we just have to really understand where the group starting points are, and in a way not bring in too many assumptions from our side, but really to learn and listen and then adapt accordingly. So that was quite a big lesson learned, I think, for us. Over to you, Gauzy.
Absolutely love that. I think this speaks to lesson number 3 about lighter touch, not necessarily meaning less robust. And we found this in terms of working with the foundation to redefine what good looks like, be it in governance or in financial assessment and so on, because the definition of good for one group might not necessarily fit for the other. So kind of being really flexible about what that looks like in order to create true equity. Thank you, Bonnie. So our 4th point was the need for long-term commitment to equity, diversity, and inclusion, moving beyond the knee-jerk reactions that we all saw post the George Floyd murder and the resurgence of the Black Lives Matter movement. And not everybody realizes that Black Lives Matter has actually been around since 2013. It's not a new body at all, but it very much came to the fore after the George Floyd murder. So a member of staff at the foundation said to us, this work is never done. And we couldn't agree more, could we, Bonnie? Because our society continues to change, continues to evolve. Just look at the last 2 years, look at what's happened, look at what's continuing to happen. So the work of equity, diversity, and inclusion needs to continue. Inequity has been around forever. It's not a new thing at all. But whilst we're making progress, the work is far from done. So there was some research done by the Black Equity Organization just last month, I think it was published, which showed that 60% of Black people in the UK don't see systemic change coming from the institutions that discriminate against them. And sadly, that includes funders. Similarly, in 2021, the Office for National Statistics reports on outcomes for people with disabilities found poorer outcomes with regard to pretty much everything: education, employment, home ownership, loneliness, personal well-being. So if we're serious about creating a truly inclusive world, it needs to be long-term commitments. It needs to have resources allocated to it, and you've got to stay the course. I know the foundation certainly came under attack in terms of this ambition, in terms of the 25% from people who didn't like it, who didn't want to see it happen. So there is still so much work to do, but funders, I believe, should be at the forefront of that charge, which is why it's pleasing that equity, diversity, and inclusion continues to be very important to the foundation. What do you think, Bonnie?
Yeah, and particularly the UK should have its Black Lives Matter reckoning with a few weeks ago with a 24-year-old young man who was shot by police in London. And because of the timing of the event, we haven't seen the public outcry that otherwise perhaps the event would have deserved. But I think, racial equity, the foundation has done a lot, but there's still a lot to be done. And we're very grateful to hear from the new chair and just on the foundations at that board level, the continuous commitment to racial equity, because it can't just be seen as, okay, done, tick the box. So that long-term commitment is what, we don't want Lloyds Bank Foundation to feel even better about themselves now. I know a lot of people are singing your praises today, but we're happy certainly to see your long-term commitment at the very least. The other thing that we want to share, number 5, and so we have 6 in total, so we know time is ticking, is power. And we think power is the elephant in the room, and power is probably the topic that perhaps we haven't raised as much as we would have liked, because also we are exploring this issue where we're trying to understand what resonates with the foundation. But we're very happy to see that there's commitment to sharing power in the new strategy, and that you are using your own power, your role as a funder, your role as a field builder to positively influence the wider sector. So we definitely see that you recognize the power you have and using that positively. But I think it's also recognizing that power and privilege is, of course, very much tied to this long-term commitment to EDI. And we really want to see, with all the list of priorities that Anne described in the opening statement around cost of living crisis, other more immediate issues, it might be easy for it to fall down on the agenda. But we hope to really see you continuing to share your power and not see kind of sharing decision-making power as a scary thing. I think there's a lot that Lloyds Bank Foundation can build on to push other funders even more progressively in this space, such as embracing participatory grant making, for example. But yeah, over to Gozi for the last lesson from our side.
Okay, I just want to say a little bit on influencing, because we need to influence more than ever now at local, regional, and national levels, and really to be the voice for those who don't hold the power and privilege that funders have, including the foundation. And that's the only way we can make sure that everyone can enjoy a really full and fulfilling life. So our final learning is about culture. So the I in equity, diversity, and inclusion is very much about culture. I think everybody might be familiar with the Peter Drucker saying that culture eats strategy for breakfast. It really does. So if the people who are driving the strategy are not passionate about that change, or worse, are pathetic, then you stand no chance of actually achieving anything. Your best strategy will remain mere words, either on a really glossy, nice strategy document or on a shared drive somewhere, and actually makes no difference. So at the foundation, our experience was very much about promoting inclusion across all of the foundation, thinking about representation. So Bonnie has talked about the enhanced consultant, and it was great that that group became more diverse within the period of time that we worked at the fund. Also, the board, hi Anne, good to see you on screen. The board of the foundation also became more diverse, and at staff level, there also seemed to be greater diversity. So obviously, you can have diversity and tick boxes without having inclusion. So inclusion, we felt, is crucially important to actually succeeding in terms of equity. So making sure you're clear about your ambition, that your own words, your own actions, your own behaviors, the decisions you make also back up what you want to achieve in terms of equity. And when there is a mismatch between those things, when the actions don't match the words, it becomes really glaringly obvious internally and externally. So for us, positive cultures require buy-in from everyone and the courage to handle any difficulty, be it across the partnerships that you're working with, across those you are influencing, across your own staff, but also all of your own grant holders. So we think inclusive cultures, inclusive leadership is absolutely crucial. And I can see Jill taking up her post. So let me finish with a quote. Everybody knows I love quotes. This one is by the great Nelson Mandela. And he said, "We can change the world and make it a better place. It is in your hands to make a difference." So Lloyds Bank Foundation, thank you for the journey. We've loved it. It is in your hands to make a difference. It's also in the hands of every other funder in the room to really make a difference.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Very much. Thanks, both of you. Don't go away. We have some questions. Okay, so I'm going to take an online question, and then if there's any questions in the room, we can take one of those. So one of the questions that's come through is, which criteria and processes specifically were disadvantaging Black and minority ethnic charities? I don't know if you have that level of granularity, or whether we do. Richard, maybe, wherever Richard's gone. Do we have that level of detail? Bonnie?
Yes, I think I mentioned in my first lesson learned kind of some of the criteria that were disadvantaging charities that are led by and for Black and minoritized communities. And another comment also in the chat, I think, it's also recognized that actually the requirement of a registered charity already disadvantages some groups because they might not be formally incorporated. They might not trust the charity kind of registered charity kind of label, and they might prefer to set up community interest companies instead. So there were lots of other legal forms that actually Black and minoritized-led organizations tend to opt for. But this was a criteria that I think, given Lloyds Bank Foundation requirements for compliance and due diligence, that we couldn't necessarily concede on. But I think it's on the to-do list to see, could Lloyds Bank Foundation, as a lot of other funders do, like Comic Relief's Global Majority fund intermediaries who can then onward fund some of the organizations that you can't reach directly.
Okay, thank you. Anybody got a question in the room? Oh, yes, lady down here. Oh, Liz is legging it with the microphone. There you go. Thank you. Do you want to say who you are and where you're from?
This is not necessarily a question for two colleagues on screen. It may be more for people here in the room. But I was wondering what the approach within the foundation is to addressing and ensuring equity within the board and within the senior staff within Lloyds Foundation, because I'm asking that question because of my belief that unless the people who make the decisions and control the resources both reflect the communities that we're talking about, but also have a keen understanding of, their interests, needs, etc., then it's quite difficult to deliver equity. And so, and I think also that it's probably controversial, but that when we're talking about representation at board and senior staff level, we're not talking about necessarily if there are 30% of said community in the population, we need 30% on the board. I think we need higher percentages than that on the board or in the senior management if you want to effectively turn organisations into organisations that serve those communities. So I just wanted to know what the strategy, plan and current situation is within the foundation.
Okay, I'll take that one if you like. So I think there's a number of things that we've done since we did this work, and that was also supported by Ngozi and Bonnie, which was very much looking at ourselves and recognising that many of us in the foundation come from quite privileged backgrounds historically. Our board was quite white, our senior leadership team is white. And we recognise that that will take us a while to do it. So we've started to change by looking at how we recruit board members. We've always done open recruitment, but we are now actively using other platforms to advertise that. We are very much signed up to 2027, which is a programme to bring more working class voices into grant making. We've been doing that for coming up to 4 years now, I think. We as a senior leadership team are currently just about to start a piece of work about inclusivity and about trying to have probably quite difficult but honest conversations between ourselves about what inclusion looks like for us. And that was definitely supported by some work Bonnie and Ngozi did. And again, in all our recruitment, in the way that we recruit, the way that we do things, we're constantly going back to the charities that we support and asking them to help us to do that. We're going to embark next year on a piece of work about participatory grant making, which again will see the people who receive grants part of the decision-making process, so it's not done up there on the board. So I think they are just indicators of some of the things we've just started. I don't know if anybody wants, if I've missed anything, Liz, our Chief Operating Officer.
No, I think you got that.
Did I do all right?
Very good. It's better than the answer I would have given.
What can I say?
It's really
No.
good.
But I think the point is we're at the start of this, and this will finesse, and we will be going through that process of learn, act, do, reflect, act, do, and until we kind of continue to replace ourselves, if you like. Okay, I'll take one, if it's a quick one, because we need to get back on track. Lady at the back of the room. Come on, Leggy Liz, get yourself around there. Thank you.
Thanks very much. I just wanted to, somebody just made a mention of those communities. I just wanted to ask you a question, which is really about whether you've defined who those minority communities are. Because obviously we're talking about possibly a fairly wide range of groups, because we're not always talking about groups that are very visibly different.
So when I said those communities, I meant those who are our constituent communities, small charities, and people who represent those communities where they live. So getting more voices from other parts of the world, if you like, into our grant making, and all of our work around place, and all of our work in influencing and policy work and everything else. I've obviously missed something.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure whether you've missed something or not. I'm just interested in when you're talking about work with Black minority ethnic communities, what the definition of minority ethnic communities is that you're working to.
Okay. I don't know if Bonnie and Ngozi, you want to answer that because you helped us kind of do some of that work. Yeah, Bonnie's nodding. That's right.
Yeah, Ngozi, do you want to respond? Because I responded to the last question.
Right, very, very
I can also
happy to.
respond.
Go on, Bonnie, entirely up to you.
Yeah. So I think at the time when we first started the racial equity program back in 2020, it was the terminology back then was still BAME, but we evolved to spelling out Black, Asian, and minority ethnic communities. And then we had a discussion, actually, what do those communities consist of? We refer to the government's website on what those communities actually consist of. But as the discussion goes, we then realize Eastern European, there are marginalized communities that face discrimination based on their racial backgrounds. That was also included in some of the applications that have gone through, and definitely Roma and traveler communities as well. That's also a very big focus of the racial equity program. But I think we didn't want to say who's in and who's out, because ultimately this is trying to tackle the issue of systemic racism in our society. And if groups feel that they do face the issue of racism, then, I think it's the job of the foundation to understand where they're coming from and then evolve our definitions as we go forward. But that, back in 2020, we were operating from the Black, Asian, and minority ethnic definition, and we refer to the guidance from the government's website. Gozi, do you have anything to add?
I just wanted to add the point about leadership. So it was important that the groups that the foundation did fund were led by and for those communities. And I think the foundation, it started with 50%, and hopefully as the new strategy evolves, that might increase, because leadership is crucially important. It's not just about groups that are working with these communities, as Bonnie has defined, but very much about the communities themselves being in leadership roles within those charities, so that they can be informed in all of the decisions, so that they can make sure that the power and privilege structures are very much in place. So I can see Jill's head teacher look. So I'm going to keep quiet and hand back over to you, Jill.
I'm so glad you've noticed that. Thank you very much, both of you, again for joining us. Hope you can stay for the rest of the session, but thank you for your time. Thanks a lot. Thank you. Okay, now that brings us to the last of our power pairs. I'd like to introduce in a minute on screen. So I won't introduce Anne yet, I'll wait for her to catch up. So I'd like to introduce you to Jim Cook. Jim is head of the Funders Collaborative at the Association of Charitable Foundations, where he helps funders to achieve more together. And we will hopefully on screen very soon, be joined by Anne Johnson. Yay! Whew, that worked. Anne Johnson is a fellow of the School of Social Entrepreneurs. In 2011, she launched her own social marketing kick called Wavelength, which then in 2020 won the Queen's Award. She's worked with small businesses, she's worked with Business Link, and she was also named in the Sunday Times 100 Best Companies list as a company who is making the world a better place. Anne also works closely with the development team at the foundation, where she is supporting our work in Telford, working in the whole of Telford and bringing partners together to look at how they can try and sustain small charities who deliver services that are needed. And together, Jim and Anne are going to talk to us about You Can't Do It Alone. Jim, I think you're starting.
So you can't do it alone. Well, collaboration between funders is nothing new. That's the first thing I think I would say. It's been part of the toolbox that a lot of funders have always used as they think about the different ways that they can go about pursuing their missions. But it's certainly the case that early on in the pandemic, we saw a real upsurge of funder collaboration of various kinds. And I think that comes through very strongly in the report and the lessons that Lloyds Bank Foundation sharing with us today. And I think a lot of those lessons really resonated with me, thinking about the wider work that we do at the Association of Charitable Foundations, which has been helping funders to connect with one another for many years, but more recently the work that I specifically lead in the Funders Collaborative Hub, which has built on some of that initial learning and the benefits that funders saw from the collaborations that they developed or built upon during COVID. And I think the reason why collaboration came so much to the fore in 2020 was that funders recognised what the charities and the communities that they were funding really needed from them was support delivered with speed and with simplicity, but also at scale. And those three things are actually quite challenging to bring together all at once in funding, but collaboration can offer various different ways to give you a better chance to achieve all of those things at once. And that can be done by pooling money together to create bigger pots, or by funders getting together to streamline and align their processes so that the journey for someone trying to raise funds for their charity is a little bit less tortuous than it might otherwise be. But also, and it's been touched on earlier, working with intermediaries. So you as a funder can work to give out grants through other organisations that are closer to the communities that you're trying to reach that you may not historically have been able to reach directly. But beyond all of those kind of more formal structures for collaborating, there was also, what I saw in 2020 when we all overnight suddenly switched to working online. We found that we could much more easily kind of dip in and out of each other's worlds on Zoom meetings and just take the pulse of what were others doing, what new intelligence did they have that was useful for our thinking as a funder. And I was working as a funder myself at the time, early on in the pandemic, and really valued that kind of resurgence of light touch networking that actually, although we all got sick to the back teeth of Zoom after a while, it was really, really helpful to be able to work in that kind of agile and connected way. I think that the other point that came out really strongly for me in Lloyds Bank Foundation reflecting on their strategy was the point about influence. So influence being one of the big three sort of pillars of Lloyds Bank Foundation's approach. What can you actually influence and really change in terms of systemic issues or kind of policies if you're just one organisation, no matter how much money you've got, whether you're a funder or another type of organisation, if you just go it alone, how much real systemic change can you achieve? Whereas if you can find the right collaborations and the right roles to play within those collaborations, how much more you can actually influence and see really big changes that affect the whole kind of conditions in which we're all working. So I think the example that was shared was around the Never More Needed campaign, which it was really interesting to see that Lloyds Bank Foundation got involved in because it was primarily a campaign of sort of infrastructure support organisations. But it was really great to see a funder getting around that table as well and bringing the different kinds of knowledge and networks that they could and different kinds of voice and advocacy to that campaign, which was very successful in securing additional government support for charities when it was so badly needed. And I think that's a particularly interesting example for us at the Association of Charitable Foundations, because like Lloyds Bank Foundation, we've also been working this year on developing a new 5-year strategy. So we've been doing a lot of consultation with funders, but also other organisations that have an interest in what funders do and how they do it. And one thing that we've heard really, really clearly through that is that people want funders not only to collaborate amongst themselves, although they do want that, but charities also want to see funders collaborating with the wider sector and bringing together the different sort of resources and strengths and knowledge that they can, because we've got some huge challenges to face up to as a society, and we do need everyone pulling together, not just sticking with their own tribes and their own kind of sectors. But that's not to say that there aren't quite big challenges when it comes to collaboration, whether that's collaborating between funders or more widely, that it's not an easy win necessarily, and so you need to be really clear that it's you're going into the right collaborations for the right reason, and you've got those kind of clear goals as to why collaborating is going to be more effective than going it alone. And there are challenges that come with that. It takes capacity, and I often hear a lot of foundations are quite lean staffed organisations. I mean, Lloyds is one of the biggest staff teams, but many struggle to find the internal capacity that they need to invest in collaborating or in collaborating well. So that's kind of a challenge I would put to the kind of leaders in the funding sector is, are you investing enough in your own people and capacity to be able to do that? But then there's also flexibility. When you collaborate, sometimes you have to make compromises. You have to flex your own procedures or your own timescales or your way of doing things, to be part of something bigger. And actually, there was a really interesting point that was made in the learning report from Lloyds Bank Foundation that foundations' independence can be a bit of a double-edged sword. It's a real strength to be able to make decisions independently of government or of private interests, and have the resources to deliver on that kind of independent objective that you have. But actually, if that incentivizes going it alone, I would argue that what independence equates to for funders is incredible freedom of choice to decide for themselves what is the best way to go about delivering on a big social mission. But actually collaborating with others can really multiply the choices you have available to you about how to fulfill that mission. When you think about who you can collaborate with, how and what you bring to those collaborations, it vastly multiplies the possibilities of how you can further those goals. So if actually as a foundation, you were to resist collaboration on the grounds that you're preserving your independence, well, I would say you could be inadvertently curtailing your own freedom and missing out on huge opportunities. But, the good news is that actually collaboration covers a really, really broad spectrum. Yeah, so actually it can be quite accessible. There are lots of different ways available for funders to dip a toe, and actually some of the most powerful ways of collaborating are some of the more accessible and easy ones, actually. You don't have to sign up to huge, strategic, multi-year, complicated partnerships. Actually, it's about connectivity. It's about understanding that your money is going out there into the world alongside other people's money and other people's activity, and understanding how it can play its best role, how it can best sort of fit into that landscape. And so just that informal networking is so important. From that is where often the more deeper, intricate forms of collaboration stem from, because it's that mutual understanding and those relationships that provide the sort of baseline conditions of that. So I think the final thing that I need to say is a big thank you to Lloyds Bank Foundation for supporting ACF, not just with funding, but also with really a lot of strategic and practical input to build the Funders Collaborative Hub. This came about initially in response to COVID and the kind of resurgence of collaboration that we saw, but has grown and grown and built. And beyond COVID, we see now more than ever, I think, the value of funders staying connected and understanding how they can each bring whatever they've got to the table and join that up to be more effective for the charities they're supporting and the communities that benefit from that support. So the Funders Collaborative Hub has now over 100 collaboration opportunities. If you are involved with a funder, please go online to our website and have a look at those, or if you're in the room today, please come over and talk to me if you'd like to find out more about that. That's it from me, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anne, would you like to pick up from there?
Yes, thank you. Good afternoon, and thank you for inviting me to share the experiences of working together within the Borough of Telford and Wrekin. Collaboration brings the joining of minds, assets and understanding, providing new dynamic ways of working, both on a micro level and a community-wide activities. Seeing each partner as a contributor, not someone to consult with or inform. In helping communities understand this, it's not just about responding to a crisis, a societal need, but it's about changing mindsets and behaviours to one of collective thinking, approaches that bring about change in both the short term and the long term. So let me share an example of this. Recently in Telford, we had several organisations working to reduce the cost of school uniforms, all seeing the need to do something, but all working in isolation. So there were swaps in local schools, calls out for uniforms by the crisis centre, local retailers reducing the cost of uniforms, and a group of passionate repairers trawling the charity shops to take uniforms to repair and adjust, all wanting to make an immediate difference. All of these groups with their mixed skills, reach and distribution offer. But in working alone, they had components missing, leaving it in the end to a limited response and an offer only to the people who identified as in crisis or were already known to the system. Instead of coming together to offer a dynamic, far-reaching and sustained approach to the repair, renew and distribution of school uniforms for everyone, not just for now, but also into the future. But if we just take that small group of voluntary repairers, how do they have a voice or become part of an ecosystem? This example is that of a quick win, But in highlighting it, it shows the way that we can change systems, asking the question as to whether the current system works. Who's involved? Who could be involved? Is it sustainable? What needs to change and who needs to be part of this change? COVID-19 certainly provided the space to show what a new way of working could look like. In Telford, charities, voluntary groups and community centres were being asked by funders and commissioners, what do you and your community need? How can we help meet this need? It provided an opportunity to stop and do things differently, but there are signs that this is reverting back. Of course, collaborations are formed and consultation questions are still circulated, but funders and commissioners are returning to setting their eligibility frameworks, limitations and outcomes without direction or influence of the people that it affects or benefits. Much of the new funding is either to meet a national need or again an immediate crisis. And I was recently in a meeting where a manager of a community centre said that they were simply tired of being funded just to manage crisis after crisis, and that they instead wanted to be in talks about avoiding crisis and being strengthened and robust for the future. And in a recent workshop, one resident asked why there could not be a resident group represented on any decisions to deliver services, recommission work, funding, or even be on the procurement panels of the delivery and services that affected them. I am the Lloyds Bank Foundation implementation lead for people and communities for Telford and Wrekin. And that role, which I'm thrilled to be part of, is funded by Lloyds Bank Foundation. And it provides opportunity for me to work with a breadth of partners, voluntary, public, business, and importantly, the people within the community to examine that kind of system change and eco-balance, using an evidence-based approach to bring people together to collectively address issues identified as a priority for that community. And this work is not about funding, but it's instead about working together to find new ways of using the existing assets and resources in a place and building a collaborative approach to doing this. As a group in Telford, we chose to start with Unlocking Potential. This was because almost every organisation involved in the early talks had the need to improve lives as part of their vision, strategies or priorities. The issue was that nearly all were managing the crisis that manifested due to not tackling the root causes or opportunities for changed outcomes. For example, several charities that supported people at risk of being homeless knew that improving life choices, opportunities and providing better housing would improve people's lives, but as a charity they were caught up in the immediate temporary feeding and keeping warm the people who were currently homeless. Similar discussions were had with those providing mental health services, probation services and services for young people not in education, training or employment. Several people said to me that they were so glad of this space that Lloyds Bank Foundation were providing to come together to talk about what needed to be achieved, what system change could look like. One commissioner said that she knew she needed to talk about change, but currently she could only give about 10% of her time to it. The other 90% of her time were dealing with the consequences of not achieving change. This role for me and Lloyds Bank Foundation offers a real opportunity to create that time and that space, bring equity to a space, to have those with ideas and knowledge to talk, change, plan to deliver something different together. We're still in our exploratory stage and we're forming an alliance. We have influencers from across the public sector, large charities and small voluntary organisations. And whilst we have a shared vision, not everyone joins the meetings. As like all of us, time is precious and we can be called away to pressing priorities, something to work on. As part of the exploratory change, we need also to widen the reach of discussion, bring new voices to the table, and almost every week a new group is proposed as a potential ally. The important thing is to keep pressing forward at the pace that feels comfortable to those involved, to feel able to challenge, to be dynamic when we need to be, and to find space to design long-term systems. My Lloyds Bank Foundation counterparts, the other 5 implementation leads in other regions, use an analogy around a bus when talking about involvement and influence, asking each other who's on the bus at any given time, who sits at the back and who sits at the front, who chooses a different mode of transport. And I often speak at in Telford that influencers have given their ticket to someone else. But lately things are turning and the interest is growing. Only last week I had an email from a commissioner from the local authority who had until now known where the bus was going, but had given her ticket to someone in her team. And she sent me a message to meet for coffee and remind her of the purpose of this work. Perhaps she's going to take a pass for the bus herself. There is, of course, things to learn for us at Lloyds Bank Foundation for the Alliance forming in Telford. For as we grow this new collaborative way of thinking, planning and delivering, we need to think about language and accessibility and diversity. And this includes me and the Lloyds Bank Foundation team. Recently, we held an event to measure where we currently were using a maturity matrix. And whilst we did change the title of the event to make it sound a bit more accessible to some attendees, but some still left the session unable to feel that they could engage with the assessment, the terms used and its aims. Perhaps we should have asked the Alliance how they wanted to measure the progress of the work and the language they wanted to use. But this is an early lesson to learn. And this work provides a great opportunity to help support people into a space where different perspectives are shared, to help people through the sometimes discomfort of power distribution and be open to question. We've already seen this and that it can be powerful in that very matrix session when scoring collaboration was 1 to 5, 5 being the highest. A part where we assessed the extent to which the local community were involved in designing services. A local councillor marked it currently at 5, its highest, where a resident asked me if we could use a nil. The most engaging, inclusive and creative session we've had so far in Telford was Telford at its best. When 40 people came into a space and effectively had their ready, steady craft at their tables. Then through imagery, they created a vision for the Telford at its best, with each leaf being a part of what might be achieved, and then the roots were the foundations that were needed to achieve this. The great thing about this activity was that it was inclusive and it freed people up from the roles that they had, and it was fun. It also provided a vision and an opportunity to share ideas with different people and organisations, allowing people now to think about which leaves they can grow or the roots that they can nurture. The tree is now being distributed. It's already on the walls of those organisations and it will form part of the local authority's next business plan for the borough. Our work currently is to strengthen the people's voice within the exploratory stage of the Alliance, bringing people together not to have a conversation with them, but for them to lead a conversation with us. We've already started a ripple to change language, stop referring to some of the housing estates as deprived areas, and instead thinking of them, as Barack Obama said, as areas of promise. Maybe we'll also start to see people who live in Telford designing services, being at the forefront of service change and being on the panels of those that commission or fund. Making real change is not always about finding more money. It's about looking at communities differently, engaging everyone and pooling assets. This work excites me as it provides the opportunity to take people out of crisis talks and activity and give them the space to pause, to think and accept that sometimes they're wrong and reignite. Eventually, this will become the norm in the borough, with everyone benefiting from it. But to make this work, we have to trust the process. We need to be comfortable with detaching ourselves from our job and our role and become part of the conversation. Being open to different perceptions, to working with others to hear the diversity of ideas. Else otherwise we run the risk of being driven by the results of consultation, or as in many cases, the strong characters in a space. And whether these are those with the financial assets or those with the powerful voices from the voluntary sector. And often they're limited, and I can count some of them in Telford. I'm just limited to my 2 hands. These voices, of course, are necessary as they often the drivers of immediate change. But the people who stand for change can get exhausted, and I'm told they're likely to have around 10 years of energy to challenge a course. Instead, this work provides an opportunity to harness all minds for sustained change. One we can all see, one that provides wider involvement of small charities, businesses and groups, one that works to remove the single focus on crisis. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Anne. And thank you as well to Jim. Thank you both. No, don't you dare. Don't you move. Don't move a muscle. Right, we've got, we're a little bit behind, but I've got one online question. I've just turned my thingy off. Which I'm going to answer. So two people have asked very similar questions. In the 6 places where we're working, is there a strong local infrastructure organisation? If not, why not? And if there is, why aren't they leading? So the short answer is no, there isn't in all 6 places. In one place there is nothing. Another place there is a local infrastructure organisation which has had a very, very difficult time. But just to go back to the beginning, what we did was we went to the 6 places and we got everybody in a room, including infrastructure, and we asked them, what is it you want us to do? And the model that we're working to is what they said they want us to do. So there is the funding is to build local capacity by investing in that place and investing in people like Anne, who is from Telford and works in Telford. So that's that one. But if you want to know any more, ask us some more and we'll pick them up. Okay. So, lovely online people, you need to click on the next session bit in your online-ness. And you will be in a group and facilitated by someone from the foundation. In the room, you will be joined, if you aren't already, by someone from the foundation who will help facilitate the next session, which there are 2 questions that we want you to answer. Thank you. And it was just in case there was a question, I didn't know the answer. So the questions are going to come up on the screen in a minute, and we want you to use the stickers, and then later you'll have a chance to discuss those, and we're going to display them all for everybody to see. Is that okay? We are about 10 minutes behind, but I'd like to give this the full 15 minutes, so I do hope people will be able to stay with us till the end. But for now, onlinees, goodbye, we'll see you shortly. Anybody that's been watching on the live feed, goodbye forever. And the rest of you, crack on. That's what I say. I'll give you a 2-minute warning. And Lloyds Bank Foundation people, jump up and rush to a table immediately. Thank you very kindly. Okay, thank you very much for taking such an energetic and active part in that session. Your comments will go up on the some boards in the networking space that we're going to move to after this. Best teacher look. Use silence, and then suddenly somebody goes, oh no, she's looking at me. Okay, I'm hoping our online colleagues are back as well. Okay, I'm hoping our online colleagues are back as well. And now to wrap up the day, I'm going to hand over to Paul Streets, our CEO, who I'm sure many of you know. And if you don't, you're about to. Sorry, I thought you had.
So, yeah, I'm the kind of punchline, I guess, but whatever. Yeah, it's been a hell of a journey, actually, the last 5 years, indeed the last 10 years. I'm actually only 25 years old. You would never realise that. But everything you've heard today in those 8 lessons, we want to try to inform our work going forwards, because it's been quite a humbling journey in lots of ways. And trying to share some of this stuff with you isn't really about us saying we've got it right. We have a huge amount that we still have to learn, that we still have to get right. Beginning of a journey, particularly the conversation around equity and post-Black Lives Matter and what it means to the challenge we had at the back of the room, about what it means about diversity in its broadest sense. I just get a sense we're at the beginning of a journey, and for me as a leader, having led organisations for a long time, it's been quite a humbling experience actually the last 3 or 4 years. And I think in some respects, Black Lives Matter was more humbling to me personally than COVID was, and what it meant for me as a leader. And I think many of us are in that position. So as we go forward, we're going to have to adapt and we're going to have to evolve. That's why I think we need these kinds of events with funders like those of you in the room, and those of you interested in funders, whether you're infrastructure bodies or whether you're charities themselves. And we're only going to achieve this by being rooted ourselves. So one of our new core values, as you've seen in the strategy, is to be rooted, to listen and to learn from others, like those of you in this room, to understand the challenges that people face, that charities face, that communities face, and to act on evidence and knowledge, constantly try to improve as we go along. And we start with that knowledge that as we sit here today, we have a society in Britain which experiences injustice, inequality, and barriers, some of the barriers that all of you are aware of if you're in this funding world and if you're running charities like we heard from earlier on today. These are deep-seated, but they've been heightened and made worse by the cost of living crisis, which comes to us on the back of COVID. People are going to have to face impossible decisions as we go forward into the future. The choice between food or heating. Charities were on the front line during COVID, we saw that, and they're going to be a lifeline as we move into the cost of living. And one of the things we need to do is to ensure this government recognises that. So the business support that's been put forward 6 months is extended longer. Charities are going to be at the right of the front line of the cost of living. For people fleeing abuse or persecution. For people who don't have a safe or secure place to live. For people who aren't supported by mainstream services, and most of the people we try to reach are not supported by mainstream services. But those small charities, those same small charities, face a perfect storm. Rising demand, staff burnout, increasing costs, declining and insecure communities. But the communities they're rooted in are also facing a crisis. Years of austerity have led to huge pressures on public spending. And it looks like, as a consequence of last week's announcements, there'll be more public spending cuts down the line. A mismatch between opportunity and resources. All of this in a system which, right from the start, anyway, was inequitable, where people continue to face discrimination because of who they are, because of where they are, or because of what's happened to them in their lives. That's especially true of people facing complex issues. This can seem a really bleak analysis if you look at that, but we know there is real strength in people, in charities, and in communities. Not deprived or disadvantaged, but as Anne told us earlier, areas and organisations of promise, and I'd like to think that the charities we fund are places of promise for people who don't have a great deal. We've seen this in the 4 decades that we've worked as a foundation. Time and time again, COVID showed it very well, and the lockdowns. We saw the response to the pandemic and its ongoing impact. Charities stuck around through thick and thin, and we saw that in a report when we looked at the value of small charities in a big crisis, which is on our website. We're passionate, as you know, about working with small and local charities, specialist charities that reach parts that others can't and don't and won't. That's why we reaffirm our mission in our strategy to partner with small and local charities and people and communities working towards a more just and a more compassionate society. Our focus will remain small to medium-sized charities, but we know we won't do it alone. We need a deep connection to the people that we serve and the partnerships that they form, and to the communities that they're rooted in that make them distinctive. So we want to do more and think about how we can support collaborations and strengthen communities. Because collaboration is going to underpin everything we do as we approach some of these crises that we move out of COVID into cost of living. That will be driven by the aspirations of people, so we need to listen to people as we tried to do during the course of the last strategy. And we're going to do what we can to continue to help to strengthen small to medium-sized charities that we think are crucial to some of the answers that lie with some of these intractable problems. So we continue to advocate for a just and compassionate society and for the role of small local charities in addressing that. But as the last 5 years have shown, we can't do that without working hard to improve ourselves. So we're going to need to keep listening, we're going to keep learning, having the kind of conversations we've begun today, opening ourselves up to challenge, deep challenge sometimes, not letting fear get in the way of doing things, not like good be the enemy of just doing something. Our focus will be on where we can make the greatest change happen. So as we go into our strategy, we've had to make some quite difficult choices with a finite budget. We've had to ensure that we think our resources are used the most effectively. That's why our new strategy will focus specifically on organisations with a turnover of 25,000 to $500,000. Because that's where we think our combination of funding, together with development support, can be most effective to make the biggest and lasting changes. To focus on small to medium-sized local organisations that are best equipped to make a difference to people's lives. So we are setting ourselves in our strategy 4 objectives, 4 commitments, if you like, to the sector that we care about and many of us love. The first is to support small and local charities with unrestricted funding over 3 years and to support them to develop as we go along that side. And in our new funding, a minimum of 25% of our grants will continue to go to charities that are led by and for Black, Asian and minority ethnic communities. And a minimum of 25% of all our funding as we go forward. We're committed to deaf and disabled-led organisations, which we feel have been neglected perhaps in the dialogue that we've had more recently. And we're only able to do that, and it's great we've got some of my colleagues from Lloyds here in the room, by the support we get from the bank. Because the bank was so foresighted and long-sighted in setting up the foundation in the first place. We have a 9-year rolling funding agreement that enables us to offer some of the long-term support we've got to the organisations that we are funding and committed to. So our second commitment is to build on the work that Anne touched on earlier, that commitment to communities and places, through our work with our people and communities and through Local Motion, working with 5 other funders across England and Wales. We want to support charities and their partners to collaborate, to fund collaboration, because people have found it difficult to get resources for collaboration. To turn communities and shape policies and structures of society through flexible funding, capacity building, building on what we've done with individual organisations, to think about what we can do to support communities and collaborations of organisations, trying to address issues that they think are important in their own communities, working to build lasting support. And our third commitment is that we could continue influencing. We will continue to be noisy about small to medium-sized charities, noisy about what they do and why they work and how they reach people who are disadvantaged, noisy about diversity, noisy about certain issues where we think we can have something unique to offer. And we're going to pick 3 of those over the course of the next 5 years, where we think we have a unique evidence base and, crucially, partners in small local organisations that enable us to make a difference. To a home. We want to focus on improving the availability of accommodation for people leaving prison, people leaving a domestic abuse relationship, people who are refugees, step-up accommodation, that challenge that people have to move on from a place of poor and insecure housing to decent housing, that step-up. We want to work with the bank in doing that. We want to focus on decent impact, on a decent income. So we're going to continue to challenge the welfare system that simply does not work for many disadvantaged people. We're going to continue to, as our third priority, extend a welcome to refugees and asylum seekers. We know that will not be popular, but actually, one of the things that touches me most actually is going about visiting organisations led by and for refugees and asylum seekers, who seem to me such a misplaced asset in this country. We should be seeing these people as huge assets to the economy, actually. We want to extend a welcome to them, support them, and be advocates on their behalf. And we work alongside charities, people and communities to amplify their voices. Because one of the things we do need to learn is to step back from freeing the front ourselves and help those who will advocate the power question, if you like, who are right at the heart of these communities, to advocate for themselves with support from us and able to do that. So that will be our approach as we go through this. And our fourth commitment is to look at ourselves, how we share resources. It builds very much on that. How we build opportunity and how power works in the foundation. We've already begun to challenge our approaches around governance and decision-making. We'll continue that. As we said earlier, we're focusing on inclusive leadership within the organisation and what that means for us as a white-led organisation, thinking about what that actually means for us. How we can reduce our impact on the environment, in particular, the role that small local charities can play in addressing the environment, because climate justice is also about social justice. So we do want to help local organisations think about how they can address that. And importantly, to maximise the value of our really unique relationship with the group. We now have over 2,000 volunteers in the group who bring their skills in risk management, in finance, in strategy, marketing, to deploy them in local small organisations. And we think that's a fantastic asset. We don't want people in the bank to paint and dig. We want to use their skills in the organisations that we support and build on that. So we all have responsibility. Each and every one of you in this room, including myself, have a responsibility to help to build a society where everyone, whatever their gender, their ethnicity, their nationality, their religious belief, their sexuality, disability, class or educational background can thrive, to really make a difference. And we're going to need to all be bolder and louder and more ambitious. And please join us on that. We'd encourage you as funders to speak up more than most funders do. As a community, we are incredibly powerful because we don't go to government with money cap in hand. We have our own resources. And we underestimate the power that funders can have and change the dynamic and the dialogue around poverty in Britain. We can be enormously powerful. We see it in the Resolution Foundation and JFR. Just think about the funding community if it all acted like the Resolution Foundation or like the Joseph Rowntree Foundation do in terms of advocacy of issues. We could be enormously powerful in the debate that's going to be right at the heart of the society as we go into a general election in 2 years' time. And I challenge each of you to think about how you can be bolder and help your boards to do that, because sometimes boards are the problem with that. Not ours, I'm just open to that. But we're not going to do it alone. It needs all of us working together. This winter and the years that follow are going to be pretty tough. I don't think any of us need to say any more about that. So that's where we're going to be heading. You get the headlines. We didn't want to talk to you for 3 hours about a strategy. We wanted to share with you some of the things we've learned. We know that many of you are on a similar journey, and we hope that some of what we've learned and shared with you today will be useful to you in thinking through things that you might want to challenge when you go back, questions you might want to ask your board. Importantly, questions you might want to ask yourselves about your processes and how you make decisions, to really do some soul searching about whether there is bias in some of the systems that you have, as we have tried to do. So I'm going to end, and we're going to have a drink, and I hope you'll join us for a drink. We've got coin strokes for the next hour, so we can run riot for the next hour. But I want to just close with some thank yous. I particularly wanted to thank Bonnie and Gosi. I mean, they spoke, and it was great, and it was great to have them online, actually. They were really important in helping us at the beginning of what for us is a journey that we will see for the next few years. I want to thank Varsha for sharing her experience as a grantee working in Loughborough on the cold face, if you like, doing the hard stuff, and what we do is relatively the easy stuff. Fiona, who worked with us during COVID and was a really important partner to us. Anne in Telford, who I thought spoke really well about the work we're doing in Telford. Anne, our own Anne, and I went to go visit them and met them in the sort of place you do, a community hall in Telford, talking about that work and the enthusiasm of the community to try to make a difference in a community of promise, as she says. To Jim, who has been really brilliant in setting up the ACF Foundation of Collaborative Hub. If you're not part of it and you're a funder in the room, or you're online, look at the Collaborative Hub, join a collaborative, because we can only do this stuff by working together. Most importantly, I want to thank our friends at Lloyds Bank, because they've been by our side for 37 years, and that means for 37 years we've been by the side of the organisations that we support. I did want to thank our BSL interpreters, Steve and Anne, thank you very much. Hard work. We did try to get a break, but it's pretty hard work doing this stuff for 2 hours. And our text typists, Laura and Natalie, have been online, making sure that people are online. And finally, I want to thank each and every one of you for being with us today. Whether there's about 200 of you on your line, we've got about 80 or 90 in the room, so we've got about 300 people here. It was oversubscribed, the event. We've had to turn people away. We could have sold tickets, so you're very pleased to be here. We didn't sell tickets. We will do next time. But most of all, I wanted to thank two people, because this is the first time we've done a hybrid event. And I think it's gone really well, actually. And I think in particular, I want to thank Callum, and I want to thank Aphrodite. Where are you, Callum? Because they were nervous as hell. Now, in the spirit of learning, we will have stuff to learn. There is an evaluation form in the back of your pack, so you don't no such thing as a free drink. The first you do is spend 3 minutes filling in your evaluation form, and then you get a free drink. Tell us what worked, what didn't work. But I really wanted to thank you, because it was an experiment doing this. And I think it's really worked, actually. The panels, the fact we've had panels online, and we've had panels online and in the room. And that's about inclusion and equity, because that means there are people here, people joining this meeting who could not have joined it had it been the usual thing we'd have done 3 years, when everybody did a meeting in London, and all those people outside London had to spend a week here, or a day or two travelling, spending a fortune, dealing with some of the inclusion issues. So thank you very much, Callum and Aphrodite. Now, do fill in your evaluation form. We hope you've enjoyed it. Tell us what worked, what didn't work, and then join us for a drink for the next hour next door. Thank you very much indeed.
Okay, I'm hoping our online colleagues are back as well. Okay, I'm hoping our online colleagues are back as well. And now to wrap up the day, I'm going to hand over to Paul Streets, our CEO, who I'm sure many of you know. And if you don't, you're about to. Sorry, I thought you had.
So, yeah, I'm the kind of punchline, I guess, but whatever. Yeah, it's been a hell of a journey, actually, the last 5 years, indeed the last 10 years. I'm actually only 25 years old. You would never realise that. But everything you've heard today in those 8 lessons, we want to try to inform our work going forwards, because it's been quite a humbling journey in lots of ways. And trying to share some of this stuff with you isn't really about us saying we've got it right. We have a huge amount that we still have to learn, that we still have to get right. Beginning of a journey, particularly the conversation around equity and post-Black Lives Matter and what it means to the challenge we had at the back of the room, about what it means about diversity in its broadest sense. I just get a sense we're at the beginning of a journey. And for me as a leader, having led organisations for a long time, it's been quite a humbling experience, actually, the last 3 or 4 years. And I think in some respects, Black Lives Matter was more humbling to me personally than COVID was, and what it meant for me as a leader. And I think many of us are in that position. So as we go forward, we're going to have to adapt and we're going to have to evolve. That's why I think we need these kinds of events with funders like those of you in the room, and those of you interested in funders, whether you're infrastructure bodies or whether you're charities themselves. And we're only going to achieve this by being rooted ourselves. So one of our new core values, as you've seen in the strategy, is to be rooted, to listen and to learn from others, like those of you in this room, to understand the challenges that people face, that charities face, that communities face, and to act on evidence and knowledge, constantly try to improve as we go along. And we start with that knowledge that as we sit here today, we have a society in Britain which experiences injustice, inequality, and barriers, some of the barriers that all of you are aware of if you're in this funding world and if you're running charities like we heard from earlier on today. These are deep-seated, but they've been heightened and made worse by the cost of living crisis, which comes to us on the back of COVID. People are going to have to face impossible decisions as we go forward into the future. The choice between food or heating. Charities were on the front line during COVID, we saw that, and they're going to be a lifeline as we move into the cost of living. And one of the things we need to do is to ensure this government recognises that. So the business support that's been put forward 6 months is extended longer. Charities are going to be at the right of the front line of the cost of living. For people fleeing abuse or persecution. For people who don't have a safe or secure place to live. For people who aren't supported by mainstream services, and most of the people we try to reach are not supported by mainstream services. But those small charities, those same small charities, face a perfect storm. Rising demand, staff burnout, increasing costs, declining and insecure communities. But the communities they're rooted in are also facing a crisis. Years of austerity have led to huge pressures on public spending. And it looks like, as a consequence of last week's announcements, there'll be more public spending cuts down the line. A mismatch between opportunity and resources. All of this in a system which, right from the start, anyway, was inequitable, where people continue to face discrimination because of who they are, because of where they are, or because of what's happened to them in their lives. That's especially true of people facing complex issues. This can seem a really bleak analysis as we look at that, but we know there's real strength in people, in charities, and in communities. Not deprived or disadvantaged, but as Anne told us earlier, areas and organisations of promise, and I'd like to think that the charities we fund are places of promise for people who don't have a great deal. We've seen this in the 4 decades that we've worked as a foundation. Time and time again, COVID showed it very well, and the lockdowns. We saw the response to the pandemic and its ongoing impact. Charities stuck around through thick and thin, and we saw that in a report when we looked at the value of small charities in a big crisis, which is on our website. We're passionate, as you know, about working with small and local charities, specialist charities that reach parts that others can't and don't and won't. That's why we reaffirm our mission in our strategy to partner with small and local charities and people and communities working towards a more just and a more compassionate society. Our focus will remain small to medium-sized charities, but we know we won't do it alone. We need a deep connection to the people that we serve and the partnerships that they form, and to the communities that they're rooted in that make them distinctive. So we want to do more and think about how we can support collaborations and strengthen communities. Because collaboration is going to underpin everything we do as we approach some of these crises that we move out of COVID into cost of living. That will be driven by the aspirations of people, so we need to listen to people as we tried to do during the course of the last strategy. And we're going to do what we can to continue to help to strengthen small to medium-sized charities that we think are crucial to some of the answers that lie with some of these intractable problems. So we continue to advocate for a just and compassionate society and for the role of small local charities in addressing that. But as the last 5 years have shown, we can't do that without working hard to improve ourselves. So we're going to need to keep listening, we're going to keep learning, having the kind of conversations we've begun today, opening ourselves up to challenge, deep challenge sometimes, not letting fear get in the way of doing things, not good but the enemy of just doing something. Our focus will be on where we can make the greatest change happen. So as we go into our strategy, we've had to make some quite difficult choices with a finite budget. We've had to ensure that we think our resources are used the most effectively. That's why our new strategy will focus specifically on organisations with a turnover of 25,000 to $500,000. Because that's where we think our combination of funding, together with development support, can be most effective to make the biggest and lasting changes. To focus on small to medium-sized local organisations that are best equipped to make a difference to people's lives. So we are setting ourselves in our strategy 4 objectives, 4 commitments, if you like, to the sector that we care about and many of us love. The first is to support small and local charities with unrestricted funding over 3 years and to support them to develop as we go along that side. And in our new funding, a minimum of 25% of our grants will continue to go to charities that are led by and for Black, Asian and minority ethnic communities. And a minimum of 25% of all our funding as we go forward, we're committed to deaf and disabled-led organisations, which we feel have been neglected perhaps in the dialogue that we've had more recently. And we're only able to do that, and it's great we've got some of our colleagues from Lloyds here in the room, by the support we get from the bank. Because the bank was so foresighted and long-sighted in setting up the foundation in the first place. We have a 9-year rolling funding agreement that enables us to offer some of the long-term support we've got to the organisations that we are funding and committed to. So our second commitment is to build on the work that Anne touched on earlier, that commitment to communities and places, through our work with our people and communities and through Local Motion, working with 5 other funders across England and Wales. We want to support charities and their partners to collaborate, to fund collaboration, because people have found it difficult to get resources for collaboration. To turn communities and shape policies and structures of society through flexible funding, capacity building, building on what we've done with individual organisations, think about what we can do to support communities and collaborations of organisations, trying to address issues that they think are important in their own communities, working to build lasting support. And our third commitment is that we could continue influencing. We will continue to be noisy about small to medium-sized charities, noisy about what they do and why they work and how they reach people who are disadvantaged, noisy about diversity, noisy about certain issues where we think we can have something unique to offer. And we're going to pick 3 of those over the course of the next 5 years, where we think we have a unique evidence base and, crucially, partners in small local organisations that enable us to make a difference. To a home. We want to focus on improving the availability of accommodation for people leaving prison, people leaving a domestic abuse relationship, people who are refugees, step-up accommodation, that challenge that people have to move on from a place of poor and insecure housing to decent housing, that step-up. We want to work with the bank in doing that. We want to focus on decent impact, on a decent income. So we're going to continue to challenge the welfare system that simply does not work for many disadvantaged people. We're going to continue to, as our third priority, extend a welcome to refugees and asylum seekers. We know that will not be popular, but actually, one of the things that touches me most actually is going about visiting organisations led by and for refugees and asylum seekers, who seem to me such a misplaced asset in this country. We should be seeing these people as huge assets to the economy, actually. We want to extend a welcome to them, support them, and be advocates on their behalf. And we work alongside charities, people and communities to amplify their voices. Because one of the things we do need to learn is to step back from freeing the front ourselves and help those who will advocate the power question, if you like, who are right at the heart of these communities to advocate for themselves with support from us and able to do that. So that will be our approach as we go through this. And our fourth commitment is to look at ourselves, how we share resources, it builds very much on that, how we build opportunity and how power works in the foundation. We've already begun to challenge our approaches around governance and decision making. We'll continue that. As we said earlier, we're focusing on inclusive leadership within the organisation and what that means for us as a white-led organisation, thinking about what that actually means for us. How we can reduce our impact on the environment, in particular, the role that small local charities can play in addressing the environment, because climate justice is also about social justice. So we do want to help local organisations think about how they can address that. And importantly, to maximise the value of our really unique relationship with the group. We now have over 2,000 volunteers in the group who bring their skills in risk management, in finance, in strategy, marketing, to deploy them in local small organisations. And we think that's a fantastic asset. We don't want people in the bank to paint and dig. We want them to use their skills in the organisations that we support and build on that. So we all have responsibility. Each and every one of you in this room, including myself, have a responsibility to help to build a society where everyone, whatever their gender, their ethnicity, their nationality, their religious belief, their sexuality, disability, class or educational background can thrive, to really make a difference. And we're going to need to all be bolder and louder and more ambitious. And please join us on that. We'd encourage you as funders to speak up more than most funders do. As a community, we are incredibly powerful because we don't go to government with money cap in hand. We have our own resources, and we underestimate the power that funders can have and change the dynamic of the dialogue around poverty in Britain. We could be enormously powerful. We see it in the Resolution Foundation and JFR. Just think about the funding community if it all acted like the Resolution Foundation or like the Joseph Rowntree Foundation do in terms of advocacy of issues. We could be enormously powerful. in the debate that's going to be right at the heart of the society as we go into a general election in 2 years' time. And I challenge each of you to think about how you can be bolder and help your boards to do that, because sometimes boards are the problem with that. Not ours, I'm just hoping to that. But we're not going to do it alone. It needs all of us working together. This winter and the years that follow are going to be pretty tough. I don't think any of us need to say any more about that. So that's where we're going to be heading. You get the headlines. We didn't want to talk to you for 3 hours about a strategy. We wanted to share with you some of the things we've learned. We know that many of you are on a similar journey, and we hope that some of what we've learned and shared with you today will be useful to you in thinking through things that you might want to challenge when you go back, questions you might want to ask your board. Importantly, questions you might want to ask yourselves about your processes and how you make decisions, to really do some soul searching about whether there is bias in some of the systems that you have, as we have tried to do. So I'm going to end, and we're going to have a drink, and I hope you'll join us for a drink. We've got coin stroke for the next hour, so we can run riot for the next hour. But I want to just close with some thank yous. I particularly wanted to thank Bonnie and Ghosty. I mean, they spoke, and it was great, and it was great to have them online, actually. They were really important in helping us at the beginning of what for us is a journey that we will see for the next few years. I want to thank Varsha for sharing her experience as a grantee working in Loughborough on the cold face, if you like, doing the hard stuff, and what we do is relatively the easy stuff. Fiona, who worked with us during COVID and was a really important partner to us. Anne in Telford, who I thought spoke really well about the work we're doing in Telford. And our own Anne and I went to go visit them and met them in the sort of place you do, a community hall in Telford, talking about that work and the enthusiasm of the community to try to make a difference in a community of promise, as she says. To Jim, who has been really brilliant in setting up the ACF Foundation of Collaborative Hub. If you're not part of it and you're a funder in the room, or you're online, look at the Collaborative Hub, join a collaborative, because we can only do this stuff by working together. Most importantly, I want to thank our friends at Lloyds Bank, because they've been by our side for 37 years, and that means for 37 years we've been by the side of the organisations that we support. I did want to thank our BSL interpreters, Steve and Anne, thank you very much. Hard work. We did try to get a break, but it's pretty hard work doing this stuff for 2 hours. And our text typists, Laura and Natalie, have been online, making sure that people are online. And finally, I want to thank each and every one of you for being with us today. Whether there's about 200 of you on your line, we've got about 80 or 90 in the room, so we've got about 300 people here. It was oversubscribed, the event. We've had to turn people away. We could have sold tickets, so you're very pleased to be here. We didn't sell tickets. We will do next time. But most of all, I wanted to thank 2 people, because this is the first time we've done a hybrid event. And I think it's gone really well, actually. And I think in particular, I want to thank Callum, and I want to thank Aphrodite. Where are you, Callum? Because they were nervous as hell. Now, in the spirit of learning, we will have stuff to learn. There is an evaluation form in the back of your pack, so you don't no such thing as a free drink. The first you do is spend 3 minutes filling in your evaluation form, and then you get a free drink. Tell us what worked, what didn't work. But I really wanted to thank you, because it was an experiment doing this. And I think it's really worked, actually. The panels, the fact we've had panels online, and we've had panels online and in the room. And that's about inclusion and equity, because that means there are people here, people joining this meeting who could not have joined it had it been the usual thing we'd have done 3 years, when everybody did a meeting in London, and all those people outside London had to spend a week here, or a day or two travelling, spending a fortune, dealing with some of the inclusion issues. So thank you very much, Callum and Aphrodite. Now, do fill in your evaluation form. We hope you've enjoyed it. Tell us what worked, what didn't work, and then join us for a drink for the next hour next door. Thank you very much indeed.